I'll show you how I painted these loose watercolor poppies with pops of detail. I like to start with a large brush. This is a number 12 by Princeton Neptune, and first I just use clear water and I paint the overall shape of the flowers. The key here is that I leave spaces in between my brush marks of dry paper. I typically start with about 3 to 5 flowers. I like using odd numbers. I think it looks more symmetrical and balanced that way. And then once everything is down, then I start putting in my color. I'm using a mix of yellows and reds to create these orange peachy hues. And I'm using values that aren't too dark. And I'm just dropping in my color in some of those wet areas. And because it's watercolor, it will just spread into that damp area. This is a wonderful way to use the wet into wet watercolor technique. Then I come in with a smaller brush for the center and I paint in a bit of green gold, and then I deepen it with some darker green and touches of ultramarine. And because those flowers are still slightly damp, that dark color just bleeds beautifully into those petals. At this point, I like to start putting in my green stems and leaves. I think it helps provide a bit of structure and it helps me figure out where I'm going to go next. So I'm using my larger round brush, and this is because it comes to a fine enough point that I can get these smaller, thinner stems, but then it's wide enough that if I push down on the belly of the brush, I can get these loose, wider shapes for the leaves. I'm using this green gold color by maimeri blue watercolors. It's a lovely green for florals and foliage. I always like to pop in a few little buds of my flowers. I think this helps give a little bit of character and whimsy to the piece, and it helps fill in the gaps of blank areas. So you can start to see that watercolor dries lighter, and once that first layer of paint has dried completely on my flowers, then I come in with a second layer, and I usually drop in a bit of darker value, a bit of bolder color, and that helps give more definition to those petals. The key here is that I don't cover my first layer completely. I'm just adding some definition, some sharper lines and edges. Then I like to give lots of punch into the center of those flowers. This is where I give lots of small detail using my pointed round number 4 brush. At this point, my first layer of my leaves and stems have dried. Now I'm coming in with a darker green, and I'm just popping in a few areas of definition by making different shapes and brush marks to really give some definition to those leaves and stems. In the final stage of the painting, I just have a look around and look for areas where I can add yet even more contrast. So once everything has completely dried, I come in using the wet on dry technique, which is simply adding paint to dry paper. So I'm enhancing those dark centers of my flowers. I'm coming in with yet even more detail, using a smaller brush to give lots of rich detail and dark value. And this is just one of the many ways I like to paint watercolor florals, by starting out really loose and light in value and then working toward more definition and sharp detail. You can really get your flowers to pop off your paper while still maintaining that loose and airy feel that is so beautiful about loose floral painting.